The world is full of things we'll never understand. The way people vanish without a trace, the promises made in the dark that never see the light of day, or the secret lives we pretend to leave behind. But sometimes, the past comes knocking, and when it does, the only way to survive is to walk right through the door and face it head on. So, what do you do when everything you've been running from catches up to you? If you're intrigued by this tale of danger, survival, and the unexpected twists of fate, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. I want to know where you're watching from. Are you in Seoul? Or are you watching from somewhere else? Let me know in the comments below. Now, let's begin. The rain never stopped in Seoul that week, as if the heavens themselves had conspired to wash away every trace of Adae's Okonkwo's past. For 11 years, she had lived under the gray clouds of regret and fear, hiding her daughter, Era, from a world that didn't want them. From a life that was once filled with promises and dreams that were shattered by pride, prejudice, and secrets. She'd left everything behind in London, her family, her former lover, and the life they could have had. In that instant, on a cold winter night in a flat far too small for what they were meant to become, she had made the hardest decision of her life. She had run, and she hadn't looked back. Now, standing at the window of a small cafe in Seoul, watching the endless sheets of rain blur the city's neon lights, Adae's felt the weight of those years pressing down on her chest. She'd rebuilt her life from the ground up, raising Era in secret, keeping her away from the high society that had once offered everything and taken it all away. But now, the past was back, and it was coming for her. The man she had once loved, Kang Jae-in, CEO of Zenith Innovations and one of South Korea's most powerful men, had found her. Or perhaps he had always known where she was, always keeping an eye on the woman who once held his heart. He had his reasons for leaving her behind, for not fighting for her, for disappearing when things had gotten hard. But she didn't have the luxury of waiting for answers anymore. The world was changing, and those who were once untouchable were now just as vulnerable as the rest of them. Adae's had known about the business deals that turned deadly, the corporate wars that spilled over into the streets, the criminal organizations that clashed in the shadows, and now it seemed that she and Era were caught in the middle. It wasn't just his company that was at risk, it was his life. And the life of the little girl Adae's had raised, the one whose father had never even known she existed until it was too late. But today, something had changed. Today, a message had arrived from Jae-in. A cryptic text, as cold and emotionless as the man who had sent it. I need you to help me. Meet me. Now. Adae's had been hesitant, of course. She'd come so far from the scared woman who had once trusted Jae-in with her heart, but fear wasn't the only emotion coursing through her as she stared at that message. There was something else, something she hadn't been able to shake for years, despite the distance. It was the truth that she knew too well. Nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. There was always more beneath the surface, always more to the story than what people let on. And Jae-in had never been the type to ask for help, not unless he was desperate. The knock at the cafe door was soft, barely a whisper over the sound of the rain, but it was enough to make her heart stop. She turned, knowing before she even saw him that he was standing there, his silhouette framed by the dim light of the street lamps, tall, commanding, and unmistakable. His presence filled the room as if he belonged there, even though, in this moment, he didn't. Not anymore. Jae-in stepped inside, soaked from the rain, his tailored suit clinging to his frame, but it was his face that caught her attention. There was fear in his eyes, a fear she hadn't seen in him before. A fear that spoke volumes about the situation they were both now tangled in. Adae's, he said, his voice low, almost reluctant. I'm sorry to drag you back into this. His words were like a slap in the face, cold, calculated, and yet, there was something raw beneath them. Something real. She didn't speak at first, studying him, weighing the situation. She had long ago abandoned any hope of reconciliation with the man she had once loved, but now, as he stood there, drenched and vulnerable, all of those emotions that had been buried deep inside her began to rise to the surface. Anger, regret, fear, and something else, something unexpected that she didn't want to acknowledge. I need you, he continued, his gaze flicking to Era, who sat quietly in the corner, eyes wide, sensing the tension in the room. They're after me, Adiz. And they won't stop until I'm dead. They think I have something they want. Something valuable. But I don't. I need to disappear, and I need you to help me. Adiz didn't blink. Her heart beat harder in her chest. She was no stranger to danger. She had lived it for years, always on the run, always hiding. But this? This was something else entirely. She had no reason to trust him anymore. Not after everything. Not after the way he had abandoned her without a word, leaving her alone to raise a child who had never even known her father. Yet here he was, asking for her help, as if he hadn't shattered her life and left it in pieces. "Pretend to be my wife," he said, his words coming out more as a command than a plea. "If you want to survive, Adiz, you have to help me. We'll disappear. We'll leave everything behind. But you need to act like you're with me. Like we're a family." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the gravity of what they meant. Adiz felt the urge to walk away, to reject him completely, but there was something more, a feeling she couldn't ignore. A feeling that told her the man standing before her wasn't the same one who had walked out of her life years ago. This was someone who had lost everything, someone who had nowhere to turn but to her. "I can't promise anything," she said finally, her voice steady, though her insides were anything but. "But I'll help you for Era's sake. For her safety." And so it began. In a world where nothing was as it seemed, where enemies lurked around every corner, and where the past refused to stay buried, Adiz Okonkwo was about to step into a dangerous game. A game that would force her to confront the ghosts of her past and to trust the man who had once betrayed her. The stakes were higher than ever, and the question on her mind was simple. Would helping Jayan survive be the very thing that would destroy them both? Adiz couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this way, like a cornered animal, running from the inevitable, every footstep a decision, every glance over her shoulder a gamble. Jayan had promised her safety, but that had been before the reality of their situation began to sink in. The rain hadn't stopped. If anything, it had only intensified, blurring the edges of the world as they moved through the streets of Seoul like fugitives. Adiz could hear the soft patter of the water, the distant hum of city life, but none of it seemed real. Not now. Not when everything around her felt like it was falling apart. They couldn't trust anyone. Not anymore. Jayan's enemies were close, too close, and the threats hanging over them felt like they were everywhere. Every car that passed by, every figure that loomed in the periphery, made her heart race with the knowledge that danger was waiting for them, just beyond the edge of the city. Adiz kept Era close, clutching her daughter's hand as they made their way into the depths of a hidden alley, far from the prying eyes of the city's sleek, polished exterior. It was a place no one would think to look, dark and damp, where the world seemed to hold its breath in the shadows. But even here, Adiz couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone, that they were being watched. Giono was silent as they moved, his eyes scanning every street corner, every doorway, every face that passed them by. The man she had once known, the CEO, the powerful figure who had seemed untouchable, now looked like a shadow of himself, torn between the survival instinct that had kept him alive in the ruthless world of corporate warfare, and the guilt that weighed heavily on him for the way he had abandoned them, her and Era, so many years ago. "I never wanted this for you," Jayan said, his voice rough, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since they left the cafe. The words felt like an apology, though they didn't have the warmth Adiz had once longed to hear. They were just words now, said in the heat of the moment, when survival mattered more than reconciliation. "I never wanted you to be dragged into this again." She didn't look at him, her focus still ahead, still on the way forward, on the safety of her daughter. "You've dragged me into this, Jayan," she said softly, her voice steady despite the rush of emotion she felt. "You don't get to walk into my life, make demands, and expect everything to be okay." She knew it wasn't right. She knew the hurt, the betrayal that had been left in his wake wasn't something that could be erased with a few words and a dangerous proposition. But somehow, in the chaos of the chase, in the storm of rain and fear, she found herself walking beside him again. They stopped outside a nondescript building, its entrance hidden beneath a layer of ivy, an old building with peeling paint and a history long forgotten. It was an emergency safe house, one Giant had set up for moments like this. Adais glanced at him, the questions mounting inside her, but she didn't ask. Not yet. She didn't want to know how long he had been planning for this moment, how deep his involvement with these criminal forces had really gone. The truth might destroy them both. Inside, the air was thick with tension. The house felt abandoned, no warmth, no comfort, just bare essentials meant for survival. Giant led them up a narrow staircase, his face cast in shadows as he silently motioned for them to follow. The space was small, only a few rooms, one of them a sparse bedroom, another a tiny kitchen. No signs of life. Just a temporary refuge. But there was no warmth in it, just an overwhelming sense of urgency, of fragility. Adais set Era down on a rickety wooden chair and closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. She'd been holding it together for so long, but this was real. This was everything she'd feared. "How long do we stay here?" she asked quietly, the question hanging in the air between them. "As long as it takes," Giant replied. "They won't stop looking for me, not until they get what they want." His voice was colder now, more calculated, and for the first time, Adais wondered just how far he'd gone to protect himself. How far he was willing to go to make sure the past didn't catch up to him. Adais stepped closer to him, her gaze hardening. "What do they want from you, Giant?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. It was a question she had been avoiding, but now she needed to know. If she was going to help him, if she was going to continue playing this dangerous game, she had to understand the stakes. He paused, his face hidden in the dim light. For a moment, she thought he wasn't going to answer, but then he sighed, a sound full of the weight of years of regret. "It's not just the company," he said, his words slow, deliberate. "It's me. I owe someone. Someone who's been watching me for years." Adais felt a chill run down her spine. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were tangled in something far darker than just corporate greed. This was personal. And the more she learned, the deeper the hole she was digging for herself and Era. "We'll be all right," Giant said, his voice breaking through her thoughts, but his words didn't have the comfort she'd expected. "Just keep your head down. We'll figure this out." But Adais wasn't so sure. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how little she really knew about the man standing in front of her. About the life he had built, and the dark secrets he was trying to outrun. And when Giant stepped away to make a call, his back turned to her, she glanced at Era. The little girl, sitting in silence, had grown up in a world far too cruel for someone so young. Adais had tried to protect her from the reality of her father's absence, the truth of what had happened. But now, as she watched Era's quiet eyes, she wondered just how much longer she could keep pretending. The questions would come. They always did. And this time, she wasn't sure she had the answers. The sound of Giant's voice echoed faintly from the next room, and Adais exhaled slowly. There was no going back now. Whatever happened next, they were all in this together. And that thought terrified her more than anything. The weeks that followed felt like a blur, each day a relentless chase, each night an uncertain refuge. Adais and Giant moved in and out of safe houses, their lives reduced to whispers in the shadows, a constant fear that their enemies were closing in. They learned to trust each other in ways they hadn't expected, through moments of vulnerability when the weight of their pasts seemed too much to carry alone. There were days when Adais questioned everything. Could she really trust Giant? Could she allow herself to hope again, after all the pain he had caused? But then there were moments, like when he stayed awake all night, keeping watch while she and Era slept soundly in the dark corners of their temporary shelter. Giant was no longer the distant, cold CEO she had once known. The man who had once abandoned her was now the man who would do anything to protect them. As their bond deepened, so did the complexities of their relationship. Adais, with her fierce protectiveness of Era, found herself letting down her guard, opening up in ways she hadn't allowed herself to do in years. Giant, for the first time in a long while, wasn't just fighting for power or survival. He was fighting for something real, something that mattered. It was during one of their most dangerous escapes, after narrowly avoiding an ambush by the very men who sought Jayan's life, that the shift became undeniable. As they took refuge in yet another safe house, both of them bruised and exhausted, Jayan looked at her in a way that sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't gratitude or obligation in his eyes, it was something more, something that took Adais by surprise. Something that whispered of a future they could build together, beyond the blood and fear. "I'm not running anymore, Adais," he said quietly, his voice hoarse. "Not from you. Not from Era. And not from what I've done. I can't undo it, but I can show you I'm willing to try to be someone worth trusting." The sincerity in his words caught her off guard. He had been haunted by his past, by the mistakes he had made, by the family who had manipulated him. But in this moment, as he stood there, vulnerable and stripped of his power, Adais realized just how much he had changed. And for the first time in years, she felt something stir within her, a flicker of hope, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in so long. For Era, it was different. The little girl who had grown up hearing stories of a father she would never meet now looked at Jayan as something more than a stranger. She could see the change in him, too, the tenderness that came when he held her hand, the way he tried to make her laugh, even in the darkest times. Era was the bridge between them, the reason they were all still standing. The day they finally escaped their pursuers, finding a place where they could finally breathe, Jayan made a decision. He called a meeting with the few people left in his life whom he could trust, his closest allies, his loyal friends. But instead of discussing business, he laid out his heart. "I've lost everything," he said, his voice strong now, no longer wavering. "But I've found something worth fighting for. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I wanted to be with you, Adais. With Era." And so, the unthinkable happened. The man who had once turned his back on them, who had sacrificed everything for a life of wealth and status, was now choosing them. He chose family. He chose love. For Adais, it wasn't about forgiveness. It was about acceptance, accepting that the man standing before her was no longer the man who had left her all those years ago. This was a different Jayan, one who had been forged in the fires of loss, one who understood the value of the family he had been given, however fractured it might have seemed at first. And as they stood there, in that quiet moment of peace, Adais knew that their story wasn't over, it was only just beginning. What had started as a dangerous game of survival, a forced partnership in the face of imminent death, had transformed into something far more profound. In the chaos, they had found each other again. In the midst of betrayal and loss, they had rediscovered the one thing that had always been worth fighting for each other. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were living. Together. As a family. And that was all that mattered. In the months that followed, things slowly began to settle. Jayan worked tirelessly to rebuild his life, not just as a CEO, but as a father, as a man who wanted to make things right. He poured himself into his relationship with Era, attending every school play, every recital, every moment that mattered. He proved, day by day, that his commitment to them wasn't a passing gesture, it was the foundation of a new life. For Adais, the healing was slower. Trust wasn't something she gave away easily, not after everything. But Jayan proved, through his actions, that he was worth that trust. She allowed herself to imagine a future, one where they weren't running anymore. One where they were finally free to build a life without fear, without the shadow of the past looming over them. It was a life built on forgiveness, on second chances, on the quiet moments of connection that had once seemed impossible. A life where love wasn't a luxury, it was the very thing that had saved them all. And as they stood together in the light of a new day, with Era laughing in the background and Jayan's hand firmly in hers, Adais knew they had found something no amount of money or power could ever replace: each other. Their love, fragile but fierce, was their greatest victory. No more running. No more hiding. They were finally home.